With another double game week on the horizon, 3 free transfers, and my assistant manager chip active, let's get set up for FPL Gameweek 25. Hey everyone, Sam here, otherwise known as FPL Pricey. In today's video, I'll be setting myself up for Gameweek 25 and hopefully helping you out along the way. I'm going to quickly summarise Game Week 24 first, though, because it just wrapped up last night. One of the longest game weeks of all time, it seems. But finally, we got a result out of Everton-Liverpool, the final Goodison Park derby, the Merseyside derby at their stadium. And what a game it was, by the way. Absolutely scintillating stuff with a last-gasp equaliser for Everton. Now, obviously great for Everton fans, great for Everton, but also great for my team. I was pretty annoyed at life going into the 95th, 96th minute, but that equaliser really helped me out because I've got David Moyes as my assistant manager. Obviously, the other two main strategies going into Game Week 24 were either on Arne Slot as the assistant manager or triple captain Salah, which I was going to go for until right at the last minute when we heard about that double Game Week 25 being dropped in as well. So I was licking my wounds a little bit, wondering what on earth I'd done to upset the FPL gods. Obviously, Salah has gone off, and he is probably the best route in terms of the ways you could have gone so far in Game Week 24. Massive congratulations if you did triple captain him and go ahead with those plans regardless. But I went away from that thinking I'll get 5 games out of my assistant manager and hopefully that will pay off and I'll put the triple captaincy somewhere else in the season. Maybe I'll get another double game week out of it. But obviously Salah has mega hauled, and whoever triple captained him are almost certainly going to be the ones who have profited the most. But I think Moyes comes second place, and that last gasp equaliser obviously gave him that extra point for the goal, but also crucially a draw and table bonus, which took him to 22 points in total. Obviously 12 points from the Leicester game, another 10 from the Liverpool game. That is a great haul from week 1 of 3 on the assistant manager chip. I've obviously got to think about who my assistant manager will be next week in double game week 25, but it's a great start for the chip. I'm very happy with that. Around my team, the only players that really did anything for me positive this week were in fact my double game weekers. So Pickford getting the assist in the first minute, even before I got the notification that the game had started, by the way, and the clean sheet in the first of 2 game weeks was really helpful. The Liverpool boys all got a return each at least. So Trent got the clean sheet before going off injured, and Gakpo got the assist in the first of 2 games. Did nothing in the second game, and Trent was benched for the second game. Obviously, we were all worried about that injury, but the fact that he came on and actually got 30 minutes is really promising, and I think it gives me a little bit more confidence that he's going to be okay by the weekend and probably going to be back in the starting lineup against Wolves. But he has had an injury, so his minutes may get managed, and I'll discuss that later on in the video when we come into my transfer plans. Obviously, Salah, mega haul, fantastic news for anyone who triple captained. It didn't massively hurt me, but it was a little bit annoying because I was thinking of going there in the first place. I don't regret it. I'd do the same thing again with the assistant manager. Getting those 5 games out of that chip seemed logical to me, but of course the result is that I'm a little bit further behind than I'd like to be without having used the triple captain. Elsewhere, Palmer was the only single game weeker who got any returns for me, 6 points from him, but his effective ownership at 90-ish% at my rank meant that I got almost no benefit from him, and the rest of them all blank. So all of my single game weekers, even though last week they did the heroics for me, this week they did very, very little. So frustrating all round, and maybe a few of them will be on the chopping block pretty soon. Overall, though, I'm pretty happy with my team. It is a very, very slight green arrow. I've still got 3 free transfers going into game week 25, obviously another double game week. And I think 121 points is maybe 1 point above the safety score. Hence the, I think, 500, 600 place green arrow from 441k to 440. So we'll take those wins. Obviously, it was looking a lot worse going into the late stages of the Everton-Liverpool game, but that last-minute equaliser handed points to Moyes and took them away from Arne Slot, which helped my rank. I think I was 514k going into the 90th minute, and obviously have ended up with a very slight green arrow. So we take those all day long. In the meantime, let me know in the comments below how you got on in Game Week 24. I've seen some huge scores out there, so if you beat me, and especially if you got a mega score with a triple captain on Salah, drop them in the comments below and use this as your platform to show off. Right then, so I won't spend too long on this section, but a quick lay of the land summary, just in case any of you aren't already aware. Game week 25 is obviously going to be a double for Aston Villa and Liverpool, now that we've seen that Liverpool have made it to the Carabao Cup final. Now, the same can't be said for Newcastle, who also got there. They will be blanking in game week 29, though, but that game between Newcastle and Crystal Palace is much more likely to be moved back to around game week 33. Now, it's not even certain at this point that Newcastle Palace won't be played in game week 29, when, of course, they will be playing in the Carabao Cup final as well. The reason for that is if both of those teams go out of the FA Cup at the next round, then theoretically there's a little gap in the calendar that they could be squeezed in a bit later on in the game week 29 window. That is very unlikely to happen because both of those teams have reasonable draws going into the next round of the FA Cup. So it's very, very likely now that at least one of them will make it through, and therefore it will be a blank game week in 29 for Newcastle and Palace. Further on down the season, we've got game week 33, which will be a double. We think it's going to be the bigger of the doubles. The most likely teams to double at this point, based on the odds of them making it further into the FA Cup and therefore reaching the semi-final, giving themselves a blank in game week 34, would be Aston Villa, Newcastle, Man City, Crystal Palace, Man United and Bournemouth. Now, obviously, a couple of those teams are playing each other in the game week 34 fixture, which drags them across to game week 33 as a double game week. Now, these are not the only teams that could double then blank in those game weeks. These are just the most likely at present, and we'll of course revisit this when we get closer and we've got a bit more information from which teams progress a bit further in the FA Cup. But the main point to remember here is that the teams that are doubling in game week 33 are also the ones who are most likely to be blanking in 34. So having something either like a free hit or a wild card around that period to navigate both and maximise the upside is going to be quite important. A quick note though, Liverpool have a good little patch of 2 games there, Leicester and then Tottenham back to back, and they can't double or blank in those 2 corresponding weeks. They will have single game weeks in both of them, and the same goes for Tottenham, Chelsea and Everton, who have all been knocked out of the FA Cup already and play each other in game week 34. So they won't be blanking in that week because we know for a fact that they're all already out, and therefore their games won't be pushed into game week 33, giving them a stretch of 2 weeks in a row of just single game weeks, regular game weeks for them. So it might be easier to navigate without a free hit if you load up on those kind of players. Later on in the season, there's a less likely blank in game week 37 and a less likely double in 36. 36, maybe it's a bit harsh to call it unlikely. There's 1 or 2 games that could go into there, namely the Newcastle-Ipswich game could get pushed back from game week 34 to 36. The reason it can't also get pushed forward into 33 is because they need to find a place for the Newcastle Crystal Palace match to go, and that's probably going to have to be game week 33. So with all of that shuffling in mind, Newcastle Ipswich, if Newcastle make it to the semi-finals of the FA Cup, would have to get pushed back, and that's most likely to go into 36. Now, of course, 33 and 36 could be completely reversed. They might play it the other way and put the bigger double in 36, but it's very likely that one will be a bigger double and one will be either not a double at all or a small one. And therefore, there's only really one other double game week that we can guarantee later on in the season. So if you've got things like your triple captain, your bench boost, even your assistant manager chip left to use, I would use this week as a good opportunity to use at least one of those, knowing that you can't really cover off all of the chips with double game weeks for certain later on in the season. The other thing I just quickly want to wrap this section up with is game week 29 in focus as the blank game week. Now, there are some big teams blanking that week. We've got Villa, we've got Liverpool, who both double this week. So the more you load up on Liverpool and Villa, the double, the more likely you are to have a problem come game week 29. Of course, you've got free transfers between then and now, but it's still going to be transfers that you have to use to get rid of those players, or maybe you want to bench them. The problem lies in both Newcastle and Palace as well, potentially blanking or very lightly blanking, because we've got a lot of Newcastle assets in most of our teams. Crystal Palace has quite a few of us out there with a Mateta or a Munoz as well. So if you find yourself in a position with 8, 9, 10 of those players from those teams represented in your team, then obviously a free hit in game week 29 might even be more powerful than using it later on in the season in a different blank. But in my team, I think I've got 5 currently represented in those teams. 3 of them are Liverpool. I won't be selling any of them this week. I've got no Villa at the moment, which is, of course, a problem for game week 25. And then Newcastle, I've got 2, but one of them's Hull, and I will probably look at moving him on in the next few weeks anyway. So I've got no Palace. I've got 5 represented players for game week 29 as it stands. That might mean that I can navigate game week 29 with relative comfort compared to maybe some other managers. So my current plan right now is to run through game week 29 with just free transfers, maybe load up on a few free transfers between now and then look at potentially wildcarding in either game week 30, 31, or 32 to set myself up for the big double game week and bench boosting in game week 33, followed by a free hit in 34 to cover off teams that have just doubled and that are now blanking. Overall, there's still a lot of things to weigh up and a lot of moving parts here with the chip strategy, but I just wanted to remind myself of the fact that if I did load up on Aston Villa players as well as the Liverpool players I've already got this week, then it gives me a bit more of an issue as we close in on game week 29 if I didn't want to use a free hit in that game week. Right then, so let's take a look at some of my favourite transfer options going into double game week 25. Option number 1 is to keep it pretty simple. I've definitely got to make an assistant manager move. Moyes going up against Crystal Palace away is expected around about 3 to 4 points via Fantasy Football Hub, 3.8 to be exact, which isn't great, obviously. He can't get table bonus. It's an away fixture, and Palace have looked pretty good. It wouldn't be the craziest thing in the world if he did get something, but there's undoubtedly plenty of upside if I switched it to a double game week manager, or potentially someone like a Silva, who's at home to Nottingham Forest, and therefore table bonus is applied. He's also got a relatively good chance of a win there. So I think he's expected something like 11 or 12 points, even though he's only got a single game week. And that is the power of the table bonus. So option number 1 would be to move David Moyes across to Unai Emery. Now, Emery, obviously, double game week at home to both Ipswich and Liverpool. Expected points of 15.2. So that just illustrates the amount of upside that there's potentially available for switching the assistant manager chip. It's definitely worth a free transfer for me. And with Emery in mind, Aston Villa actually have a very good home record so far this season. So Ipswich is a great opportunity at a few goals, potentially a win, potentially a clean sheet, hoping for a 10 to 12 pointer there. And then Liverpool, like we saw with Everton this week, is a free swing at table bonus. Now, if Aston Villa can replicate the form that they have done so far this season at Villa Park, and maybe even get a draw, who knows, possibly even a win against Liverpool, then that could be huge for Unai Emery and for the assistant manager chip in the second game week I'm using it. Obviously, we're not expecting anything, but if you can get yourself a nice balance of one nice fixture where you're expecting a win, potentially that being Ipswich, like we did with Moyes with Leicester, and then have a free swing at a difficult fixture with table bonus, I quite like those odds. I quite like that strategy. So Unai Emery at 0.8 million is just 0.3 more than David Moyes. I've got that money in the bank. I can make that move with one free transfer. That seems like the most logical play if all of my players are fit and nothing else goes wrong between now and then. And I'm chuckling to myself because something almost always does. Now, option 2 is if something did go wrong. Now, the first and most likely thing to go wrong is that we get news that Trent Alexander-Arnold isn't actually quite ready to start against Wolves at home. He obviously got 30 minutes off the bench last night against Everton, but Slot came out in a press conference beforehand and said he was nowhere near starting. We saw him in full training though, and the fact that he got 30 minutes suggests to me that he can't be that far away. It's just a massive question mark now on whether or not he's fit enough to both start Wolves and then also Aston Villa a few days later. If he is, then there's no way I'm getting rid of him. Obviously, he's a great player to own. But if he's even slightly a doubt for one of those fixtures, and obviously it will have to be the Wolves one, knowing that we won't be able to make the transfer after that's been and gone. If he's a doubt for that first fixture, we think he might get limited minutes, then there is a potential route for me to get rid of him, sell a double game weeker, which seems a little bit absurd, but move towards Kirkes at Bournemouth, who has a great run of fixtures, and importantly, no blank in game week 29. So it gives me an extra player ready to play and cover off anyone wanting to free hit in game week 29. I can just do it with free transfers. But that also gives me the opportunity of removing David Moyes and not going for Unai Emery, but going for Arne Slot instead, who's a bit more expensive. And of course, I'm already tripled up on Liverpool, so I can't get there. I can't get to Slot unless I sell one of Salah, no way, Gakpo, maybe, and then Trent, who is potentially an injury out still. So that's option 2. There's a kind of option 2A, which has appeared very late last night. That would be to get rid of Gakpo instead of Trent. Now, Gakpo went off the 67th minute against Everton. That was with a little bit of a limp. I don't think it's anything, and I've had a look online. There's been no quotes since at this point. So I don't think it's a proper injury, but it's one to monitor. And if for whatever reason we get a word that Gakpo has a proper injury, then I might be tempted to move Gakpo down to someone like a Wissa and then use that opportunity, that little bit extra money in the bank, to upgrade Moyes to Arne Slot. Now, Arne Slot is expected to get 15.5 points via Fantasy Football Hub. Again, just a bit of an illustration of the kind of expected upside for the manager. It's not an exact science, but that's a little bit ahead of Unai Emery. I do really like Emery, though, because the opportunity for table bonus gives you a big upside, although obviously the more consistent of the two managers will probably be Arne Slot. So it's whether I want to play it safe or go a little bit more maverick with Unai Emery. I think if Trent or Gakpo were to be confirmed to be major doubts or out, I'd be tempted to go with option 2 and trade out Moyes for Slot to go a little bit safer. And obviously having that money in the assistant manager already for 1.5 million this week means that when I want to move it across in game week 26, I don't need to worry about how much money I've got in the bank either. And it still guarantees me that triple up of Liverpool, who are, of course, the best team in the league right now. So I still quite like option 2, but only if either Trent or Gakpo are confirmed to be major doubts going into game week 25. Now, option 3 is kind of attached to option 1. That would be Ahmad out for Rodgers in. And that would give me 2 Aston Villa players if I did attach it to option 1. Now, I don't necessarily need to do option 1 and option 3 together. I could just do option 3 by itself. But I do need to make that assistant manager switch. And if I did, I'd have the exact money in the bank to do Ahmad to Rodgers, as long as Rodgers doesn't rise in price. And I can't believe he hasn't done so far this game week, considering he's got a double to come. But I've got the exact money to do it. So it's whether or not I feel like it's worth the upside of going for the double game week of this week. And as crazy as it sounds, I'm not so sure it is right now. Now, in my particular situation, I've already discussed my chip strategy earlier in the video. Ahmad really works for me for that chip strategy because he's got a good run of fixtures between now and game week 29, and importantly has a game week 29 fixture. So again, it's a transfer that I won't need to make when I get to 29, and it will lead me further away from needing to free hit. And that fixture is Leicester, so it's a great fixture too. I'd probably want him even if I was free hit. So Ahmad with good data, better than Rodgers as well, by the way, 0.42 XGI per 90 versus 0.31 for Rodgers. He's got a good fixture this week as well against Spurs. Yes, he's up against Jed Spence, which won't be easy. He's been very good. But Spurs themselves haven't looked too strong or consistent at the back. So Man United and Ahmad could definitely exploit that. And it's all about whether it's worth 2 transfers just to have Rodgers for this one game week. The reason it's 2 transfers is because I'd be using an extra one to bring him in this week, selling a player that I probably want back down the line, and then also selling him again before we hit game week 29, because 1, Villa's fixtures after this game week don't look too tasty either, and 2, they blank in game week 29, and I've already discussed that I'm planning to run through 29 without that free hit. So it's whether or not it's worth those 2 free transfers. I don't personally think it is. It's very tight, and I could be persuaded through fear more than anything else to go for him last minute if I could still afford it by the time we get to Friday. But considering the fact that after this game week has been and gone, I'm probably not going to look at my side and want Rodgers anymore. I don't know if it's worth chasing him just for this one game week. He's on 8 yellow cards as well, so he's probably not a great long-term hold after game week either, because he would be serving a 2-match ban if he gets that 10th yellow card before Aston Villa's 32nd game. So with all of those things combined, I think I'm just going to buy myself a really big sofa to hide behind, because I am scared of Rodgers this game week. Unai Emery is likely to be my only Aston Villa coverage going into game week 25, which seems very light. I'm just not sure it's worth 2 free transfers to bring in Rodgers, when those 2 free transfers later on down the line could save me from needing a free hit and potentially a -8 as well. So let's finally take a look at my full team selection for double game week 25. 3 free transfers still to use, 0.6 in the bank. And of course, David Moyes, currently my assistant manager. So that's 1 free transfer that will go. It will probably go to Unai Emery because I've got that triple Liverpool, unless we get word that either Trent or Gakpo are significant doubts going into game week 25. From top to bottom in my starting 11, I've got Pickford in goal. Not expecting a clean sheet away at Palace, but he has pulled off heroics here and there. He is very good for save points, and the run of fixtures between now and when I'm looking at wildcarding around game week 30-31 don't look too bad either. And importantly, he plays in game week 29, so I'm happy enough to hold on to him for the foreseeable. In defence, of course, we've already discussed Trent. Got 30 minutes off the bench at Goodison Park, so I think he's probably going to be okay to start the game against Wolves, but I will, of course, keep my eye out for any quotes from Slot before we hit the deadline, because if he's even a slight doubt, that will push me towards thinking that I could sell him for Kirkez and potentially bring in Arne Slot for David Moyes. After that, though, Gabriel away at Leicester seems like a great fixture for him. Leicester weak from the set pieces. Gabriel obviously is going to be a target man from those corners. Arsenal do look depleted up front, but that means for me, they're probably going to have to rely more on the set pieces for their goals. Gabriel, I think, is still going to be a great player to hold on to. Robinson at home to Nottingham Forest. Nottingham Forest obviously very potent, but Fulham's defence, statistically at least, has been very, very good. So at home, I'm always going to back him ahead of the likes of Lewis Hall away at Man City. Seems like a pretty obvious one to me. And Robinson, with 10 assists already this season, just keeps surprising me. He keeps pulling them out the bag. He's been a great player to own. I haven't started him as often as maybe I should have, and I've missed a few of his assists recently, so fingers crossed he comes good for me in game week 25. Into the midfield, really happy with this midfield 5 at the moment. Salah, obviously captain. I'd probably triple captain him if I could, but of course I've got the assistant manager locked in, so I can't. But again, good double game week for him. Was phenomenal in game week 24. What a player. Just absolutely ridiculous player. Palmer, vice-captain at the moment, mainly because of the very slight doubts on Trent and Gakpo, but Brighton away for him. Obviously didn't do too well in the Cup, but did score 4 against them earlier on in the season, so I don't think it's a bad upside play if the worst were to happen and Salah were to be out for whatever reason. That's not going to happen, so it won't be a problem. But Palmer away at Brighton is still a good hold. Then after this game week, he's about to run into a set of Leicester and Southampton, both at home, running into game week 29. So I'm going to hold on to him until game week 29. And Mbeumo, Ahmad and Semenyo, all great midfielders to own right now. I think the more Bournemouth, the better. I've only got one, but that will do for now. Semenyo away at Southampton's a great opportunity. Points, good underlying data, great shot volume, great player all round. Very, very happy with him. Ahmad, I've already discussed. Spurs away is a good fixture, even though obviously he's going to be man-marked by Spence. That won't be easy in itself. But a good run of fixtures afterwards, so I think he's a good hold for now. And Mbeumo, of course, we know he's overperforming on his data, but he's so consistent. He's a 90-minute man. He's got penalties. He's got some set pieces. He's playing either in the wide spot on the right-hand side of the 3 or centre forward alongside Wissa, depending on which formation they play. He's just a great player to own in FPL, and there's no way I'm looking at getting rid of him for the next few game weeks. A good fixture run to come for him. Up top, we've got Gakpo and Isak. Gakpo isn't going anywhere as long as he's fit. Now, on to Alexander Isak quickly. I haven't talked about him in this video because I don't honestly plan on getting rid of him ahead of Man City, which on paper isn't great, but their defensive data has been really poor this season. Isak has been phenomenal. I actually really do expect him to score against Man City, so I'm not going to get rid of him unless something crazy happens, like he got an injury between now and the deadline. One thing on Isak, though, the next 3 fixtures, if you look at them on paper, don't look the strongest. So I do understand if people wanted to get rid of him. It's Man City, Forest, and then Liverpool. So those are three, historically at least, pretty good defences. Man City, the worst of the three, defensively speaking. And then Nottingham Forest and Liverpool have both put up some really good numbers defensively. So I understand the logic if you did want to get rid of Isak. I don't personally think it's necessary in my team, but I get it. If you do want to get rid of him, if you want to chase upside on another striker, it does make sense, especially if you're looking to avoid the free hit in game week 29, because of course Isak won't play that week. So look, I completely understand why some people are questioning whether he's worth it in your team right now. But for me, the data's fantastic. He's on penalties. He's in the form of his life right now. And Man City in particular is not a bad fixture for attacking returns. So for me, he stays. On the bench, Pedro, stinking up the place week after week. He will be sold, do not worry, but this is not the week for it because he's on the bench anyway, and there's not much I can do with the money I've got in the bank. So I'm going to wait for a later point when I've got a better opportunity to get rid of him. He's also got Southampton next week, so if I need to rely on him, then Southampton next week, surely he gets something in that fixture, if he's even a starter at that point. So I'm going to hold on to him for now, but he will be gone before game week 29 because he's got Man City that week. There's no way I'm going to play him in that fixture, and he's been terrible for me as well. So he's definitely a sell, but it's all about timing, and this is not the week to do so because there are other players that are a bit more expensive that I can't afford to sell him for now, but once I've shuffled money around and I'm reorganizing for game week 29, I can get rid of him in the process and upgrade him to a much better striker around 7 to 8 million. We're looking at your Chris Woods, your Matheus Cunhas as well, maybe your Johan Wissers. All of those players are much better than João Pedro, but I wouldn't start any of them this week, and it's not worth the free transfer looking at my front seven right now. So Pedro stays on the bench, rotting out the place, next to Lewis Hall away at Man City and Greaves away at Aston Villa. Overall, I'm pretty happy with my starting 11. I'm planning on using one free transfer. It would give me 3 free transfers going into game week 26. And that also means that by the time I get to 29, I hopefully should have 4 or 5 free transfers ready to go to tackle game week 29's blanks without needing that free hit. Now, as we reach the end of today's video, as always, let me know in the comments below what your questions are ahead of the game week 25 deadline. I'll try and answer as many of you as possible before we hit the deadline on Friday evening, don't forget. And if you've made it this far, I'd really appreciate it if you could leave a like and subscribe to the channel. In the meantime, though, I'll see you next time as we start preparing for game week 26.